So good morning. This will be our last lesson, still divided into two parts. The first part of lesson 4 is planning process. Now we have terms not to forget for this discussion. So loop, as you can see on the screen, loop having form in or characterized by loops, procurement, scars, staffing. So I believe you are familiar with these terms now with your other subjects. So let's just run it through. So for the objective of this discussion is enumerate the critical elements in project plan, define core planning process, define facilitating planning process, and then connect the work breakdown structure and activity list and create Gantt chart. Actually, this discussion is related to project management. This is just a continuation. Okay. So first, we have what is a project plan? A project plan is an approved document to manage project execution. So the project plan becomes the primary source of information and how the project will be planned and executed, monitored, and controlled and closed, as we have previously discussed. So in the previous session, we have established the importance of putting a project plan and what the consequence will be if we do not have a plan. Okay, now let's talk about the critical elements of a project plan in the next slide. So before we go to the next slide, a project plan can and will change over time as the environment about outputs, scope, inputs, resource change. So we have already discussed this, that the changes that is done within a plan are controlled changes, and these changes should have more benefits than risk of the entire project. So a good project plan will have the project manager and the project organization respond to changes with least delivery in terms of time and cost, and of course risk. So now the critical elements of a project plan. The first is time. Time is always short. Diba? We always have that cliche as saying that the best thing you can give to someone is time. Because once you give time, you can never get it back because it's already spent. Dili makapwede mo, oy, rewind sa gahapon. No, we don't. So time is always short. Tends to expand towards time available. Hence, need to keep buffers low. So, like I said, you can never take back time. So make sure when create a plan, make sure nga enough ang time, dili isubra, dili kulang. Usahay dapat na ay gamay leeway para in case of emergencies within a certain project or within certain deliverables. Okay, wala bita kabalo na ay mga fortuitous events that might happen. Okay, project timeline. Initially agreed final delivery date is expanded to show the delivery dates of the phases and sub-phases, diba? Ang mga project na siya yung mga entire project, na siya phases, na siya sub-phases, because na may mga project plan nga before we can make the whole for mabuo nimo na yung mga gagmay-gagmay nga mga deliverables. And of course, critical path. This is a flow and timing or completion of prerequisite activities will determine the critical path in terms of time. So, the word critical path, if we apply this to your degree, sa inyong mga kurso, a critical path actually are those activities nga kung dili nimo mahuman, dili ka makaproceed sa lain. Kay prerequisite siya. It's just like you cannot have a systems thinking a subject o BPO 1 man siguro if wala pa ka naka-take og serve, wala pa ka naka-take og English 127 or unsa ba to siya, based communication man siguro SMP1, di ba? It's or dili ka pwede paglantaw nimo sa imuhang prospectus, dili ka pwede mag-una o internship if wala pa kabalo, wala pa nimo na take tong ubang subject. So katong ubang subject, mo to siya mahimong critical path because you can never go to the next unless nahuman na siya nimo. If magama po kag balay, dili ka pwede mag-unag atop, if wala pa kay pamalay, asa man may butang imong atop, imong paluparon. So critical path na siya. So buffers, project leaders provide buffers between activities to cover unexpected external events, resources getting sick, if tawo, or acts of God, what may balaan na, fortuitous event, typhoons and floods. As you can see, this is being observed, diba? Most of our national highway within the province are being improved, right? And then once there is a forecast of floods or forecast of rain or probably landslide, the workers will stop, not because they get sick, but because there are certain events that does not allow them to continue working. So dapat i-buffer nimo, i-change nimo, mo na siya yung gitawag og controlled changes. Because if they continue to work on the roads and heavy rain is pouring, possible landslide probably because they are near in a cliff probably or a mountain probably, then it can cause more damage than benefit to the entire project plan. So dapat i-control nila ang changes. So buffer, when planning a project manager often additional time, diba? Additional time to each task or additional time to each deliverables in case of unexpected circumstances. Then critical path, they also describe this as sequence of project tasks which add up to the longest overall duration. This determines the shortest time possible to complete the project. Any delay of an activity on the critical path impacts the planned project completion date. So like I said, if some of you may be listening to this and some of you may have suffering from violation of prerequisite rule, or the layman's term we have for that is jumping, diba? It delays your time to be able to graduate, diba? In your initial time plan, in your project timeline, you put a timeline in which you will graduate in 4 years. And those 4 years is divided into, diba, phases and sub-phases. Into phases niya is more on every year there are 2 semesters. And every semesters there are different subjects. And every subject, you're only contact 3 hours per week. O, diba? Kaya na may phases, sub-phases. And then, when you overlook your project timeline and took a subject who is a prerequisite of another subject, it's part of the critical path, what will happen now? Diba? It delays you because you haven't looked up on your timeline or wala mo kita sa imong project timeline. Kay wala mo nakakabantay nga, hala, nasayop ko. And then that mistake affects everything what is next. So that's why it's really, really important to look up on the critical path. Or kung sa imo ni subjects, the prerequisites, so that you will not violate the prerequisite rule. And then the project timeline, you will learn about this project timeline. We'll discuss this in part 2. This is more on the Gantt chart. This Gantt chart allows you to map out your timelines, including the details of tasks and deliverables. I believe also you have feasibility subjects as of the moment. You're using Gantt chart, right? So that is your project timeline. So this is on critical planning elements. First element is time. The second element is resources. So resources is always scarce. Most scarce resources is generally people. So we have this in economic subject, right? That is one of the goal of economics, to efficiently and effectively use scarce resources. So Estimating resources involves determining what resources in terms of personnel maybe, equipment maybe, or material that what qualifies of each resources will be used. So if you have a project plan and it has phases and sub phases, you need to know or estimate and determine what are the resources in of these phases and sub phases, and when each resources will be available to perform your project activity. So the activity resource estimating process is closely coordinated with cost planning, which will be covered within this topic. So cost planning, of course, if you have resources, if it is a manpower, you have to pay these people. Not only pay for their labor, but pay for their insurance maybe, their health benefits maybe, and other benefits that they have. If this is an equipment, what type of equipment is this? Can it be sourced locally or you need to buy it in another country? So you have to consider that. Kay mahal man siya kung adto ka sa laing lugar mo pala, sa laing nasod mo palit, di ba? Project plans help visualize realistic assignment of scarce resources across multiple activities and projects. Resource plans surface potential contention for resources upfront than to face the latter problem of unrealistic deadlines due to lack of resources. A very crazy plan and not thinking about resources are those individual who says this, ay okay ra na, bahala ra na, makitaan ra yan na nato. Diba? What happens now is if we keep on that mantra, one way or the other, a problem will always comes along within the completion of the project. So that's the second critical planning elements, resources. And the third is cost. Pinakaulahin ni siya pero murag mahal-mahal ni siya. So cost, project cost management includes the process involved in planning, estimating, budgeting, and controlling costs so that project may be completed within approved budget. Cost estimates are generally expressed in units of currency, peso, dollar, or depende sa imuhang currency nga ginagamit for that budget. This is to facilitate comparison both within and across project. In some cases, you can use units of measure to estimate costs, such as staff hours or staff days, along with their cost estimates, to facilitate appropriate management control. So money is always not enough, actually. But between time and resources, money is often easier to get, yes, because even if you have the loads amount of money, if you don't have the right people, then still useless, right? Once one can get more money, but a project cannot normally be hired mere through throwing bodies into it, meaning you cannot just, ay siyara, ay muna siya. No. In global projects, big projects for that matter, resource cost account for the bulk of project budget. So cost. Sometimes when you're talking about cost, is for this, I think they are not only thinking about money, but they also consider people, because it will cost you a lot if you don't have the right people manning the business. So, and the next slide, we talk about the core planning process. Actually, mabara kayo siya, guys. Don't worry. So, the core planning process. Planning process that must be done for all projects. So, we have these questions that you have to consider in the planning process. What output must be delivered? So, what you will go back. What is the scope? What is the work breakdown? So that is the deliverable. If na siya mga phases and sub-phases, then you will, in the sub-phases, napay phases, na sub-phases, kasi sa sub-phases, napay sub-sub-phases, diba? Depende sa type of project. So, what must be delivered on that sub-phase, on that phase, on that entire project? What activities to produce it and how long? So your activity plan, activity definition, activity sequencing, activity and total duration. So what is the definition of the activity? Unsa may sequence niya? Parehara mo na, if the activity is to cook rice, unsa may unang buhaton? Dapat na jud kay bugas, diba? Ipalit kag bugas, sunod ana dapat na ka oy kalderong lungagan. Kung rice cooker, dapat na kay rice cooker. Dapat sequence, man pud pwede nga kana ganing lutuon sa nimo ang bugas o sa kilisan, di ba? So dapat nakaana. And then duration. And then the cost of that. And who will do the activities? So this is your manpower, resource plan, resource requirement, resource activity scheduling. Because you need to have the right pool of people doing a certain project. You need to have a different manpower because different people have different expertise. What if this is building bridges? You cannot have all engineers there. Kaya kung puro sa na engineer, kinsa may mo masa atong simento ba? So you have to make sure that your resource plan is you gather the people who are needed in such activity. And then how much will it cost? So cost estimate. Your cost estimate should be dili kaayo siya dako, ipod siya kaayo gamay nga magkakulang-kulang ka. Kaya at the end of this project, namatay ginatawag og, di ba, namatay control sa last closing. We have also what you call this? Audit. Di ba? Di man po na nimo ikumkum ra nimo ng ubang mga kwarta kay that's not good. Okay? So, to wrap this up, to wrap this slide up, in summary, when planning a project, to ensure that you cover all bases, these are the common questions. So what output must be delivered? That is your overall project plan. What are the activities to produce it and how long? Muna siya gitawag mo itong time element. And who will do the activities? Kani siya, your resource element. And lastly, your cost element. So there are technically 4 for this slide. So to continue, planning process that are not performed all the time but well-managed project have them. So while it is not a requirement when planning a project, it is a good practice for the project team to involve all appropriate stakeholders depending upon their influence on the project and its outcome. So the project team should involve stakeholders in project planning since stakeholders have skills and knowledge that can be leveraged in developing the project management plan. The project team must create an environment in which stakeholders can contribute appropriately. So this is more on the voice of the people, your stakeholders. If your stakeholders includes the employees, so the voice of the employees. Stakeholders must be looped in at all times. You can ensure this is done by having answered the following questions. So these are the following questions that you need to consider. Who managed the project? Who reports to whom? This is your organizational plan. That's why the reporting lines, project roles, and responsibilities. That's why in an organizational chart, you know who reports to whom, looking at the hierarchy. Okay? Muna naa kay floor manager, naa kay supervisor, it has hierarchy. Dili ka mo diretso adto sa inyong CEO or adto sa inyong board kung na kay problema. Muagi sa kaog reporting lines. Next is what resources need to be hired or contracted by and when. So plan ni imo ang staffing. Staffing plan nimo, recruitment plan nimo, kinsa man imong kinahanglan. Next is which quality standard to follow. Your quality standards, your measures of quality, transparency. What are you going to follow? Sometimes, I believe in the government, you cannot bid man ang mga government projects, no? Sa mga contractor. If you cannot be included, if you're a construction company, you cannot be included in a government bidding if the project cost 50 million and above. Siguro, hopefully I'm right, because the last time I know it's 50 million and above. If your construction company is not ISO certified in the area of construction or kanang mga area ng mga environment inana. So dapat naa siya you have to have a certain certificate of quality and what quality measures you're going to use in doing what you're doing. You might probably have seen people when, di ba, na humana ang dalan and then ilang bangagan o a cylinder siya cylinder, ilan ang murag ilang kanang bangagan nila ang semento, ang spalto na semento, ilan ang ibangag. Yung man, ilan ang taon actually. That is part of measuring. If this is karsada ha, this is ilan ang after 1 month, or 2 months, they will bangagize it. Bangagize, I don't even know if that's a word. That's not a word, guys. I'm just using it for this for discussion purposes. So they will make bangag of it. A cylinder na siya, i-burrow na nila, i-drill na nila panaog sa kanang ilang gigama nga construction nga dalan, and then kanang ilang na makuha ilang man ang kwaon muna ilahang i-study if kani siya nga sa karsada is of good quality na siya, they conform with standards and the likes. What else? We don't have toll diri sa to kanang mga expressway, mga NLEX, XLEX, wala ta ana diri. But if you happen to have tried passing by an XLEX, NLEX, unsa pa na siya darang LEX dira, in an expressway, you have to pay toll, and the larger your vehicle, the bigger your vehicle. If you're a cargo vehicle, mga trailer, mga articulated vehicle nga katong dagko kayo ang mga karga, mas mahal na sila bayad. Ngano mang mas mahal na sila bayad kay mas dako na sila damage sa karsada kumpara sa motor, sa auto, mga light vehicles. Gamay ra na sila. Ngano man kay sila may kung naapay quality, di ba, na may quality standards ang karsada, sila atong daling maka-wear and tear sa ato ang mga karsada. Munang daling mga ang karsada. Munang sa expressway, mas mahal na sila og bayad. Kay sila may madaling makaguba. Kay naamon po na measures of quality nga gibutang ana, di ba? If magsige sila agi ana, yes, the road is of good quality, but dili siya dapat agian ani niya sige. Ni magsige man siya agi. So dapat mahal siya bayad kay kung mag-repair, dali ra, di ba? And what other measures of quality if it is a project? If balay, pahimo kag balay. We called it in our dialect na ganing ampaw nga murabag siguro us kasakong semento yung 20 kasakong balas sa may itsura yung balay ana. So namo na siya standard nga sa isa kasakong semento dapat inanira kadagan kasako nga ratio sa balas kay para ang imuhang foundation sa balay dili kato ganing basin mahuypan ra electric pan o guba imong balay. So there are standard of measures for that. And then of course, how will the risk be identified? Also manage the risk, you have to have risk management. If you're an FM major, you have this risk management subject, right? But if you're an HR major, you still have to know what are the necessary risk involved. Naman po ni siya sa SMP4 kanang risk involved sa operations management. So I believe everybody have ideas on this. So you have to identify the necessary risks like the acts of God or the fortuitous event. There are also risks that acts of humans. How are we going to prevent those risks in completing a certain project? So to continue, I think this is the second to the last slide before I'm going to end this part 1. So facilitating planning process. Sorry. So what will be communicated to whom, when, how, by whom? Communication plan. Communication is actually part of SMP 4 lesson 3, I believe, or lesson 4. Communication is really, really important. Not just verbal communication. Especially if you are an ISO certified or a PQA certified company, documented communication is really important. This is to ensure there is something black and white in paper trails. If not paper trails, software, email, communication is important. And asa man mo communicate. Why is it that communication is important? This way, you can trace back also what is the progress of your project. So what services, goods, materials need to be bought and when? The procurement plan. What to buy, when, from which potential sources, estimate of how much and the likes. So, importante siya. Communication is important. It's not only in your relationship that you have. with whatever relationship you have right now, but especially in business. And this communication should not be verbal. Guys, manrabaho naman laman mo puhon or mahimo man laman mong mga or tag-iya mo mga negosyo or naamoy mga negosyo probably in the futures because you don't want to work, you want to be an entrepreneur, you want to create jobs. That's better than having a job actually. So, communication is important. Why? Kung magkasuhanay man gani, naa kay ebidensya. Kung may ka niingon mo gud si kuan, niingon si kuan. Dili na pwede madalas korte. That's why if wala mo ipuhunan sa mga empleyado sa mo, if you are going to be hired, make sure na kay certificate of employment na na-hire ka. Make sure you understand. Diba usahay man good pareha gud nang when we download applications for our cell phones, we don't read the contract, right? Aminin, dili mo tigbasa. Aminin dyan ninyo, dili mo tigbasa. What are the necessary privacy we have given up to this certain applications? Have you read that? When you download Facebook for your new phone, when you downloaded among other apps that you use for online class, you did not read any of that. You just accept. If naay kasuhanay, wagod mo'y mahimo because you accepted everything without reading it. Then you might ask, nibasa day ka, ma'am? Yes, I read because I was so curious. Unsay naa dito. Actually, we have given a lot of our privacy. So mingon mo nga, mind your own business and you post it online, guys. FYI, the moment that you go online, the public minds your business because you are not a private person anymore because you put yourself online. Inyo dagang lola or lolo kana sila. They can still tell you mind your own business because they don't have social networking sites or application for that matter. They don't have Twitter, they don't have TikTok. So, unsa raman nila, malahig na sila na nato kung ato silang surang-surangon or apil-apilon sa atong binuang. So, make sure that when you get employed or when you are a manager of your own business or the owner of your own enterprise, put communication in written. Diba? You're doing actually this communication wherein you screenshot your submitted works, you screenshot your conversation so that you have proof. You're actually because of this online thing, you're actually doing it, practicing it, communication, to whom, by whom, when, and how, or the plans for communication. So when you get out of this and work, make sure you do the same. Because if you are in a project, this is very helpful. Not only to you, but to the organization you are working or the organization you are involved with because you own the business. So to sum it up, there are 3 critical elements in a project plan: time, resource, and cost. And then what are the core planning process that must be done for all project? The scope of plan, the activity, the resource, and the cost of plan. O balik ra gyapon, di ba? Cost of plan. And then what are the facilitating planning process? You have your organization plan, you have your staffing plan, you have your risk management plan, your quality plan, your communication plan, and of course, your procurement plan. The last one, what goods and materials we bought, when, and why. So that's the end of the first part. Let's move to the second part next time. Okay.